I mentioned before, we spent the week up in Prescott at camp meeting, and my family came down last night. But we were up there, and so we got to hear from the two generals, and I told Jeff it was a good thing that they were all staying up there and didn't have to hear me preach after them preach right away, that he gets stuck with that job next week to preach to all those that have just gotten preached to by the general superintendents. But it's been a great week, and God has challenged me. And so as I've been studying this week, it's a story that I think most of us have probably heard quite a few different times in a few different ways. But we're going to continue in the book of Luke. And so we've been in this New Testament challenge. If you haven't jumped in yet, there are booklets on the back where you can finish off the year with us wherever you want to jump in. But we've been reading through the New Testament in a year, and we've been in the book of Luke. And this week, as I was reading through this story, I was reminded of when I turned 16, or kind of the month before then, right? So the month before you turn 16, or the month before you were supposed to get your driver's license, what do? You look at every possible car that you could get, right? That was what I was doing. I was buying auto magazines that I had never purchased before. I was looking at cars that I had never did before, trying to figure out, which car was the car. And I remember this conversation with my parents, and my parents, you don't need that on the screen yet. There you go. My parents, they had said, hey, we're going to buy you a car, but you have to pay for your insurance and your gas. And I said, okay, I'll go find a job. That's fine. I'll go do that. And so then they said, well, no, we don't really want you to get a job, because I was doing drumline and I was doing school and I was doing all that stuff. They were like, we really want you to enjoy high school, so we don't really want you to get a job. I was like, great, so what am I supposed to do for insurance and gas, right? I don't have a savings that's going to get me through that. So they were like, okay, fine. We'll pay for your insurance and your car, but you got to pay for gas. And I was like, okay, so I'm going to go get a job, right? And they were like, okay, fine, we'll pay for your gas too, right? Worst negotiators ever. And so I remember that conversation. I was like, this is going to be awesome, right? My dad has told stories of, he had this old car at first, but his next car from a family friend was a Camaro. And I'm thinking, like, my first car has got to be awesome like that, right? So I'm looking at these magazines. I'm thinking it's going to be this great car. I gave him, like, the list of things that I was requesting in the car, right? And I thought this was going to be great. I was going to have it all paid for. It was going to be good. I was just going to get to enjoy it, right? It was going to be an awesome thing. And so they come home with the car. It's a week after I turned 16, so I was mad, right? Because I wanted it, like, the day that I turned 16, right? But I had to wait till we found a car, and so I'm waiting. And so it's a week later. He finds this car, and he brings it in, or he pulls it up, and it is older than I am, this car. Somebody had tried to, like, back it between two poles and missed, and so it's, like, dented in on both sides, right? The car is so old. Rhonda, one time, we were coming to church to bring my drum. I had to bring my drum set when we first started every Sunday, lug it in and out. Rhonda comes out to help me bring in the drum set, and she goes to open the door and just yanks the door handle right off the car, right? She's sitting there holding it and like, what do I do? And says, like, it's fine. I'll just open it from the inside. It's good. Right? So this car is old. They paid $500 for this car, right? Older than me, dented on both sides. I was like, this is terrible. What am I supposed to do with this car, right? How am I going to take this to school with me on Monday? So I'm looking at this car, and I was a little sad at first. But the windows, so this is the great thing, when you live in Arizona, right? The windows in this car, I'm pretty sure were illegally tinted. They were super dark. Sorry, Billy. But they were black, right? So at night they were so dark, I had to roll down the windows to be able to drive anywhere, because I couldn't see out the side windows. They were so dark. And the AC in this car was incredible, like icicles in my beard. It was awesome, right? So the two most important things, I think, were in the car, right? The AC was awesome, and the windows were so dark, I didn't even need shades on the windows. And so it was great. But this car, right? So I thought I got everything that I wanted, right? I had a car, I got my license, it was paid for, my insurance was covered, gas was covered, right? Every weekend I was thinking I was going to California or something, right? And so I'm thinking this is going to be awesome, everything is good. But then the next week, I had to take my sister to 8 appointments, right? My little sister. And I was like, this isn't what I signed up for at all, right? I got all this stuff. I'm supposed to just be able to hang out with my friends, enjoy high school, not bus her around everywhere, right? And so slowly this thing started to go. And so I remember the first weekend I had the car, I decided that I was going to go cosmic bowling. And so I had taken my sister all the appointments. I was like, whatever, like maybe they misuse my car a little bit, but I'm gonna go hang out with my friends tonight. And so we went cosmic bowling, but we went like all the way over. It was like the 17 and Bethany home. And so it's not the greatest of areas of town, right? So we go Cosmic Bowling. We get out of there about 1 a.m. And I go to get on the 17. I go to drive home. And the ice cold AC suddenly gets warm. And I was like, oh no, that's not a good sign, right? It starts to turn off. The lights start to kind of flicker. And I was like, this isn't good. This isn't good at all. So I'm like trying to get off the freeway. I'm heading down. And so I exit off the freeway. And I get on the freeway, you exit it off and you kind of came up a hill. And then it kind of sloped back down. And so I go to turn off to the side street. And the car just completely dies. And I just start rolling down the hill. And I'm hitting the brake, right? First car, I don't really know all of the like weird things that you're supposed to do in this moment because it's never happened to me before. So I'm hitting the brake. I can't get the car to stop. I'm just rolling uncontrollably down the road. I pulled the e-brake. Nothing happened, right? There's nothing there. And so I decided, okay, maybe if I wedge the car up on the sidewalk, it will stop, right? So I literally just like jumped the curb, wedged the car on the sidewalk, and it stopped, probably doing some crazy damage underneath the car, but it stopped on the sidewalk. And so I'm kind of panicked in this moment, right? I thought like I almost died. There's nobody on the street. There's nobody there. It was fine. But I was like, I don't know what's going on. So I call my dad. He's 40 minutes away because we lived out here. And so he jumps in the car and starts coming down. And so my friend's dad, who lives pretty close, comes over. And so we're trying to look at the car. We're trying to jump it. We can't get it to do anything. And the three of us can't get the car now off the curb, right? And so we're just stuck. And I was like, this is the worst week ever, right? I just got my car, I got my license, it was good, and then it was misused, and now I'm going bowling, and it was a lot of fun, and now I can't even get my car off the sidewalk, right? And so I'm just thinking, like, it's just going completely downhill from there. My dad comes, he throws his shoulder into the car, knocks it off the curb, like one try. It was awesome. And so we've made it home, and they fixed it. We figured out that, like, the alternator was bad. It was leaking fuel. Like, it was just bad. It was bad. But we figured it all out. But I think for a lot of us, right, we can probably relate to some kind of story like that in your life, right? You just thought that you just hit the jackpot, you got everything that you ever wanted, and then it slowly started to backfire on you as you went through the week. And this story, as we read this morning, is very similar to that. And so we're going to jump to Luke chapter 15, to a parable that I think most people, even outside the church, have kind of heard in some form or another with the parable of the lost son. And I just want to read it to us this morning because I think sometimes I assume that we've read some things and we miss pieces. And so I'm just going to read the story to us. We're going to read through the first half, and then we'll jump to the second half. He says, Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired hands.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still long off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be... I'm no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For the son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate." We're going to stop there for a minute. Right, this story is when I was a teenager, I heard this probably preached at least 5 times, right? And so it's one of those great parables. But in this, right, we see there's a challenge at the beginning for us to kind of understand the context of the story. For us nowadays, we see that as it could be kind of a normal thing. Like, just give me kind of what would happen if you died, and I'll leave and sell it, whatever. But in the context of this story, right, you didn't do that. So one, the son comes to the dad and says, "Hey, basically, I wish that you were dead, and I just got what was mine in my inheritance, and so can you just give that to me now so that I can leave?" But the inheritance, it wasn't like a health insurance plan. It wasn't just money. It wasn't just cash that he could take and go. The currency of the day was really land, right? And land stayed within a family, and it was guarded. It was a sacred thing. And him being the younger son, the father really didn't have to give him anything, right? It was really the older son. But if the father were to choose to separate his estate, the younger son, got a third of all that the father had. And so the father does this, and he gives him a third. And so it's a third of his land, of his flock, of whatever the currency was that he was doing. So he gets a third of all of the estate of his father. And then he goes and he sells it and turns it into currency so that he can leave. And that's unheard of. We don't even have an example of someone selling land to someone outside their family in the entire Old Testament. So this wasn't a common thing. This wasn't something that just anybody did all the time. It wasn't like we sell land and homes and stuff like that. This was a big deal. And so now a third of what was the father's and what was the family's is now gone. And this son, he leaves. And so there's this, at the beginning of this story, there's this kind of theme of separation. And so this young son comes to his father and he separates from that relationship with his father and his brother. And he says, I want what's mine, just give it to me. And he separates them. And then from there, he separates himself from his home country and his homeland, and he goes and he leaves and goes to a foreign place and begins to squander the money, right? And so now he's even separated from his wealth because he's lost it all. And even worse, right, for a Jewish man is to be around the most unclean animal possible, and now you are separated even from your ritual holiness because you are now among the pigs. And there's this constant separation that happens in this young guy's life. And so this I feel like there's this pride at the beginning of this story. To say, I want what's mine, what's deserved for me, what's owed to me. I felt like I kind of had some of that arrogance when I was 16, right? I was the only boy out of 5 kids, so I had 4 sisters. And so naturally I was the favorite child in that context. But I thought, hey, like I'm the only boy, my dad's got my back, right? Camaro, hook it up, right? I thought for sure that was kind of deserved and owed to me as the favorite child should be, right? And so I just thought that was the context that we were in. And so there was kind of a pride in that a little bit. And we see that in this story that he wants what's his, and it's just a selfishness like Jeff talked about last week. We're just naturally selfish people. And so I want the best for me. I want what works and what looks good for me. And so when you die, if you haven't set it up so that we split the inheritance, the older brother gets it all. So I'm gonna ask for mine now, so I don't have to wait till then, right? If we go to court, the older brother always wins. I don't want that. Like, just give it to me now, right? And so he has this kind of selfish arrogance at the beginning of the story. And so there's this separation between all of what he knows until he gets to the kind of hits rock bottom. Have you been there? Doing all that I can to do on my own, right? All that I want to do, living life the way that I think it should be lived. And yet, I find myself feeding the pigs, wishing that I could eat as well as them. And then recognizing that even the servants in my father's household eat better than that and are taken care of better than that. And so we go back. Have you ever been in trouble and have rehearsed the line that you're going to say when you come face to face with a person that you're in trouble with? My dad used to work nights when we were kids, and so he would sleep through the day, he would be gone at night, my mom would come home, and so they could take turns watching the kids. And it was always when your father gets home, right? And so we would have like 8 hours to rehearse what the plea was going to be when he got home, so that we can make sure that when he got home, he knew that we were sincerely sorry and that we didn't deserve as much of the trouble and consequences as we thought we did at the beginning, right? And so I remember doing this and walking around my parents' house and thinking through or pacing around my room, like, what am I going to say to make this better, right? And so we can see the younger son, he's got these lines rehearsed, and he comes to the father, and he gets out the first 2 lines, and then the father doesn't hear anything, right? Just completely ignores him and says, no, you're my son. And welcomes him back in and embraces him back in. This isn't really, when we were looking at this story and Jeff had talked about humility versus pride, this isn't really humility in itself. This is kind of humiliation first, right? he didn't really just come to this decision on his own. He hit the rock bottom and was wanting to eat what pigs were eating and just decided, hey, it's better for me to be a servant here than to eat what pigs are eating, and so I'm going to go this route. And so there was just a humiliation that was happening over here, a kind of forced humility in a sense, right? And yet we see when the Father comes, there's just this welcoming and embrace in the midst of that. But then the story continues. That's kind of where I always, as a kid, kind of heard the story stop, right? When we were doing the whole Sunday school board, maybe the older brother was kind of slapped on there at the end, but it was really kind of there that we stopped. That, everything was good, right? But let's continue reading. We're in verse 25. It says, meanwhile, the older son was still in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. Your brother has come, he replied, and your father has killed a fattened calf because he was with him, or because he has him back safe and sound. The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him. My son, the father said, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. Right? There's this disgruntled brother who again feels a sense of entitlement, right? The property that now is the calf that's being slaughtered and all of this stuff, the ring that was given, the robe, that's the older brother's now, right? That's his stuff. Everything that the father owns, he's not just saying that in a figurative sense. Everything that he owns is literally the older brother's now. The younger brother took his third, I get the other 2/3. That's the way it goes. And so now what I have is so there's this sense of entitlement in, hey, this is really mine. And yet, the father says, hey, it is yours. It's all yours. But we still get to celebrate this, right? We still need to celebrate. It was yours in the beginning. You could have taken it and done it. But for a lot of us, I think, we find ourselves sometimes where we miss the boat a little bit, right? The brother comes back. He's angry. He doesn't even care about his brother, and he doesn't even call him his brother, right? This son of yours. You said that to your parents before? Hey, this kid. Not me, this kid did it, right? I'm not going to relate myself to them at this moment, right? This son of yours, he doesn't even call him his brother, and yet you can hear the father kind of saying, no, your brother is home, right? Doesn't even call him his brother, he's just mad. And we read it and we say, okay, that's kind of justifiable, right? It is his stuff. The brother just disrespected the entire family, just took a third of the land that belonged to the household. Right? He did all this stuff. He disgraced their family. And so there's some shame probably in this moment too for him. And he's not even willing to say my brother. He's just mad. And Jesus, as he's saying this to these religious leaders, I think for us, we miss some of the context of those religious leaders, right? The Pharisees, when the older brother says, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders, right? The Pharisees, that was their boast. We've kept all the commands of God, right? We're perfect people. We've done everything that God's asked us to do. We're here. Why are you talking to these tax collectors and sinners? Why are you going to these guys? They don't deserve that. They did all this other bad stuff. We've never disobeyed God. We've kept all the commands, right? That was their boast. And so Jesus comes and he says, no, he welcomes them in. And yet there is still an invitation to the older brother, right? I think sometimes I miss that the father wants to welcome the brother into the celebration the same way that he wanted to receive the younger brother. He wants both. It's not just that the older brother missed the boat and he says, hey, sorry, dude, your brother's home. Deal with it, right? He welcomes him in. He wants him to come in. And this is the part of the story that drives me nuts. We don't know what happened afterwards, right? We don't know if the older brother reconciles with the father and the younger brother. We don't know if the younger brother kind of stays in this life of humility, just grateful for his father's blessing in the midst of this moment. We don't know if the older brother the next day kicks the younger brother back off the property on his own. We don't know any of that. And so as we read this story, I think for us, it's kind of asking us to fill in some of the blanks afterwards and to finish the story on our own a little bit. And to think through, where are we at in the story? Because for some of us, we've received a lot from God, and yet we're living the way that we want to live and doing what we want to do and just kind of squandering it. And for some of us, we've hit rock bottom and we've said, okay, God, even the scraps from your table are going to be better than this. And so we've come back to God in this kind of humiliation, and God greets us with a big hug and says, give him a ring and a robe and get him fed. Some of us have hit there, and now we're beginning to see some of that and sense some of that. Some of us are the older brother. We've lived good lives. We've done what we've been asked to do. And yet we're seeing somebody else blessed a little more than us. We think somebody else got what we deserved. We think that we're entitled to something different than maybe what we've received so far. This theology of love in the midst of this story, this challenge of the Father to just love unconditionally for us doesn't really make sense. It doesn't make sense for him to receive the Son who just took a third of what he was living on. If someone came to you today and just took away your house, right? I wouldn't just welcome them back in when I had to move to a different one, right? That's my house. There's a challenge here that says, I'm going to love them the same. And for us this morning, where are we at in the story? When I was going through school, I have a pretty good memory. And so I could just remember stuff really easily. And so school was kind of easy for me because I could read the book and I could regurgitate it for you and I could take a test and I could pass. And so it was really easy. I didn't have to study super hard. Sorry if you did. Just wasn't me. Jeff doesn't like that about me, I know. He had to try really hard. I didn't. And so there was this challenge for me. And I felt like even in the midst of that, like I don't really know how to study super well even today because I never really had to. And so I would read it and I would remember it and I would do it. But there was this kid in my class who was kind of the troublemaker kid, right? He didn't do any of his work, didn't do well on the tests, but he had a really rough home life. And we were friends, we were close, right? But the teacher, who did they pay attention to? That kid, right? And so I was sitting there, I'm like, dude, I just got A's on every single paper. I just aced all your tests. I have 115% in the class. And you probably don't even really know my name. And this kid is having lunch with the teacher, getting all this kind of stuff, right? I'm like, what is this? And as I read this story, I feel like I go back to some of that kind of feeling inside myself. That no, I did the stuff. I did it the right, and this guy, what? Have you been there? When I was working and I was going through work, right? I did all the right stuff and this guy got promoted, not me. Right? Did they not see me? Was I working too hard? They just didn't know? I think we've all felt like we've done that before. We've pointed the finger and said, no, like I deserve that. Why did they get it? Even sometimes as we go through kind of this faith journey, right? And we say, man, I remember when I was in junior high, we went to a winter retreat, and it was like all of a sudden our whole winter retreat just kind of experienced the Holy Spirit in a really cool way. He just kind of fell in the retreat, and all of us just forever felt changed in the midst of that. When we sing now, I feel like it's just residue from that retreat when I get to worship and I get to feel the presence of the Spirit in music. And so I remember this feeling, and we came home, and there were some kids who were on that retreat who it was their first time with our youth group, right? They hadn't been there for very long. They hadn't experienced what we were experiencing week to week. And we came home, and there were some kids who didn't get to go to that retreat, and there was like this resentment between them a little bit, right? Why did they get to experience? I've been going to church here for 5 years. Like, why did they get, and I didn't? Have you felt that before? Why are they, I didn't? Do you not see me? And we see the older brother's just disgruntled heart in the midst of this moment. Where are you at this morning in the story? What do you need this morning? Some of us, we need to get all the way down to humiliation before we can really hear from God sometimes. But this morning, don't just hear that you're humiliated. Hear, my son is home. He was dead, and now he's alive. He was lost, but now he's found. For those of you that have grown up in the church, or you've felt like you've done all the right things, go into the party and celebrate. It's okay. Go into the party and celebrate. Rejoice that the one who was lost is now found. The fact that you didn't have to run away and be humiliated and do all those things isn't a bad thing. It doesn't mean that you get less. It means go into the party and celebrate. Rejoice over the person who is now alive. How hard is that sometimes for us, right? Just go celebrate. They're back. There's a fear sometimes that, hey, like they're taking what's mine. I deserve that more. But yet, go, celebrate, and be in the midst of that. For us, as we talk about this old life versus new life, sometimes the old life says, I deserve this. I'm entitled to this. And the new life says, it's God's, not mine. The new life says, I'm going to celebrate just as much for them getting it as me getting it. I'm going to go into the party. Where are you at in the story? And this morning, as you ask yourself that question and you think through, what is it that God is trying to say to me? Listen, don't try to give your excuse. Don't try to give the rehearsed line. God, I don't deserve it. I know, I'm sorry. Right? We do that so well, don't we? Don't do that this morning. Because God's going to ignore it and just say, I love you. You were lost, but now you're found. You were dead, but now you're alive. Hear those words this morning and allow that to challenge your heart to say, maybe for me, I'm coming out of humiliation and into the presence of God for the first time. Or maybe this morning you felt like you've done all the right things and you felt like you were entitled and you weren't getting everything that was owed to you. And God is saying, hey, just come into the party. It's right there. I want to bless you too. It's not different. Yeah, I want to celebrate over them, but I want you to be in the celebration. I want you to celebrate too. I grew up my whole life in the church. Pretty much from birth, right? And as we were at camp meeting this week, literally one of the ladies that was in the nursery at Orangewood with me was up there. And as I was talking with her and her husband, right now as kind of adults, which is just weird. I don't know if you've experienced that before. It's still weird for a little bit for me to preach to some of you because you were like my Sunday school teachers growing up. But this lady was in the nursery with me, and so at camp meeting, I led the music on Friday night. And it was just a worship set, right? I just led the music. And at the end of service, she comes up to me and she's crying. And I was like, what in the world? This like 80-something-year-old lady is just weeping. And she's like, it was beautiful the way that God just used you in the midst of this service to speak to me. Because I remember holding you as a baby, and now I get to see God at work in you. And I remember sitting there thinking, man, I've raised my life, my whole life in the church, right? I don't have a crazy, awesome story. I did all the right things, right? Maybe I deserve something. And yet God used the midst of that, this growing up in the church, to speak to a lady who's in her 80s in a different way than would have ever been if I hadn't grown up in the church and been where I'm at right now. And so God uses those things, and he uses those things. It's not that I just got ignored by God, right? It's not that God was going to bless the other person more than he's blessing me. God has blessed me, and it's been awesome. And so now I get to walk in the midst of that, and so God uses that just the same way. So you don't have to go that route and get all the way to humiliation if that's not you. Then don't do that. Go in the party and celebrate this morning. But if that's you and you feel like I'm hitting low right now, hear the words, you were lost, but now you're found. You were dead and now you're alive. Let's pray this morning. God, we thank you for your word. We thank you for a story maybe that we've heard our entire lives. And God, as we think through this story and we see the characters and the way that they're going about their lives, God, would we find ourselves in that story? God, if we're heading down a path that is just causing separation after separation after separation, would you turn us around? And God, for some of us, we've got to hit the rock bottom before we recognize where you're at. And so God, this morning, if we've hit there, I pray that we would turn and we would begin to walk back home. Back to a Father who doesn't see the shame and the hurt, but sees the son or the daughter that he loves. God, that he loves to a point where he is willing to run to greet them. God, this morning, maybe some of us have just grown up in the church our whole lives. We feel like we've done all the right stuff, and yet we're seeing you bless and move more in somebody else's life. And God, we're saying, hey, we deserve that. God, would you crush the entitlement that we feel this morning in the midst of that? Would you allow us to follow your feet in humility and enter the party? Would we celebrate over the person who is being restored to you? Would we celebrate over the way that you are blessing and moving in the lives of the people around us? And God, would we not say that's great for them, but would we go into the party and receive it too? God, we thank you. We thank you for loving us in a way that it doesn't matter how many times we've messed up. It doesn't matter how far away we've tried to go. It doesn't matter how much of your blessings and the things that you've blessed us with that we've wasted, because you still greet us the same way. God, this morning, would those of us recognize that we were lost, but now we're found. That we were dead, but you've made us alive. God, we recognize where we are and where you are in that story. Will we find you? In your name we pray. Amen. Is our benediction in there? Let's read that together. If you stand, and we'll read this together, and then we'll be dismissed. And now may all praise be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, ever shall be, world without end. Amen. You're dismissed.